Imagine a land of sun-drenched hills, fertile valleys, a place where empires would clash for control the P. But how did two civilizations, separated by the Mediterranean Sea, come to wage war against each other? This is the story of Rome and Carthage, a conflict that would shape the ancient world. We're going back in time to explore the events leading up to one man's audacious invasion, Hannibal Barca. Carthage, even today, the name conjures images of incredible wealth and naval power, located in modern-day Tunisia. It wasn't just a city, it was an empire built on trade and maritime dominance. Think of them as the masters of the Mediterranean, controlling vital sea lanes from Spain to North Africa. This success bred prosperity, but also created anxieties across the water. Rome, meanwhile, was steadily expanding its reach, conquering territory in Italy and eyeing the riches of Sicily. As Rome's influence grew, so did the inevitable friction with Carthage. Both were ambitious powers, and their interests clashed directly over this strategic island. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow burn of resentment building for decades. Then came the spark, a dispute over the city of Messana in Sicily. Both Rome and Carthage saw its control as vital to their own security. And that's when all hell broke loose. The First Punic War had begun, but early on, Roman military strength looked very different from what it would become. They relied almost entirely on citizen levies, farmers and shopkeepers turned into soldiers. The early years were brutal for Rome. Carthage controlled the seas, a fact that quickly became apparent. Their ships were faster, their crews more experienced. The Romans suffered a series of humiliating naval defeats. Losing ship after ship, it was clear they had no answer to Carthaginian naval superiority. How could they possibly compete? Rome knew they couldn't ignore this problem, so they decided to build a navy fast. A monumental shipbuilding program was launched. Driven by desperation and necessity, they hired Greek shipwrights, copied Carthaginian designs, and poured resources into construction. The result? A large fleet, but one composed of largely untrained sailors. Against all odds and defying expectations, the Romans achieved a crucial victory at Mylae. It was a costly battle, but it shattered Carthaginian confidence and proved that Rome could fight at sea. The psychological impact was immense. Suddenly, Carthage wasn't invincible anymore. But what did this single victory truly mean for the war's trajectory? After Mylae, the war settled into a grim stalemate. Years of raiding along the coasts of Sicily and Italy followed, neither side able to deliver a decisive blow. It was a long, grinding conflict, draining resources and testing the resolve of both Rome and Carthage. A war of attrition had begun. Rome's relentless expansion wasn't just limited to Sicily. They pushed into Sardinia and Corsica, further stretching Carthaginian manpower and finances. This constant pressure created deep divisions within Carthage itself, factions vying for power as the empire struggled under the strain. Internal conflicts can be more devastating than any battlefield defeat. Finally, after over 2 decades of bitter fighting, the First Punic War ended. Rome emerged victorious, forcing Carthage to cede Sicily and pay a crippling indemnity. A victory. Yes, but one that left a deep scar on Carthaginian pride, and as both powers licked their wounds, something else was brewing, a simmering resentment that would soon ignite once more. Alarming reports reached Hannibal. Roman reinforcements were gathering near Rome. His situation was dire. Now, he faced an agonizing decision: defend the city and risk annihilation, or attempt a strategic retreat. What choice will he make that could determine the fate of Carthage? Could Hannibal truly win by standing still? After so many devastating victories, he found himself in a peculiar predicament. Despite the pleas of his loyal commanders, men who'd seen firsthand the dwindling supplies and growing discontent, Hannibal refused to retreat from the shadow of Rome. He believed that if he could simply hold his ground, the Romans would eventually break. Their resolve, manpower, their very will to fight, would crumble under pressure. It was a gamble, a desperate act born more of defiance than strategic brilliance. News of Hannibal's stubborn stance reached Rome like a wildfire. Roman scouts relayed his decision back to the capital. It was precisely what Rome needed: a spark of hope. Suddenly, defeat didn't seem inevitable. Families, previously hesitant to send their sons and husbands into battle, were now stirred by tales of Hannibal's entrapment, a Carthaginian army seemingly stuck in Italy. The message was clear: fight for Rome, fight for freedom. Hannibal's men began an immense undertaking. They dug deep and wide trenches, erecting formidable earthworks around their camp, transforming it into a fortified stronghold. It was designed to be unbreakable, a physical manifestation of Hannibal's unwavering belief in his strategy. But these fortifications also served another purpose. They bought time for Rome to regroup, recruit, and prepare. Fabius Maximus, ever the master strategist, understood that Hannibal's project wasn't just about defense. It was a vulnerability. He subtly exploited this, whispering rumors through sympathetic villages, tales of a Carthaginian army trapped and desperate for supplies. These whispers ignited small acts of defiance against Hannibal's authority, disrupting supply lines and fueling resentment amongst the Italian peoples he sought to control. The first cracks began to show. A small Roman raiding party, emboldened by these rumors and taking advantage of Hannibal's focus on fortifications, successfully ambushed a Carthaginian supply train. The wagons scattered, horses panicked, and precious grain vital for sustaining the army through winter was lost. It was a minor victory, but it underscored a growing problem. Hannibal's grip on resources was slipping. The setbacks weren't lost on Hannibal's inner circle. His second, in command, increasingly frustrated by dwindling resources and a stalled campaign, finally dared to voice his dissent again. In a tense council of war, he argued passionately for a full retreat back to Gaul, a desperate attempt to salvage something from this failing enterprise. The air crackled with unspoken resentment. Hannibal's response was swift and absolute. With chilling coldness, he reminded his lieutenant and all present of their oaths of loyalty. He emphasized that any display of weakness, any hint of doubt, would be met with severe punishment. His authority remained unchallenged. Dissent was not tolerated. The Romans, ever resourceful, saw an opportunity. Roman engineers began to dig not above ground, but beneath it. They burrowed relentlessly under Hannibal's fortifications, hoping to collapse them and create a breach for the legions to storm through. It was a dangerous gamble, a subterranean battle waged in darkness. The Carthaginian sentries were eventually alerted. A frantic counter-excavation began, a desperate race against time to find and seal the Roman tunnels. What followed was a brutal underground skirmish, miners battling miners in claustrophobic darkness. Pickaxes clashing against picks, the fate of Hannibal's defenses hanging precariously in the balance. Long before Hannibal's name became synonymous with fear, the seeds of a monumental conflict were sown. Years passed in Carthage, a bustling port city fueled by trade and ambition. Young Hannibal watched his father, Hannibal Barca, a general consumed by the First Punic War, a brutal struggle against Rome for control of Sicily. He witnessed firsthand the humiliation of defeat, the burning desire for retribution simmering within his father's heart, a feeling that would soon ignite in him too. The inevitable happened. A tunnel collapsed, trapping several Carthaginian miners beneath tons of rubble. Hannibal was forced to divert precious resources, men and supplies for a desperate rescue operation. But the Romans weren't waiting, they were preparing their main attack, seizing upon this unexpected advantage while Hannibal's defenses were weakened from within. The final reckoning loomed. Fabius Maximus refused a direct confrontation with Hannibal. He understood that would be suicidal. Instead, he unleashed a relentless campaign of harassment, small raiding parties targeting Carthaginian foraging columns, and isolated settlements. It was a war of attrition, designed to drain the enemy's resources without risking a decisive battle. But could this strategy truly break Hannibal's grip on Italy? Or would it simply provoke him? Hannibal responded with immediate and frantic action. His cavalry, typically dominant, were stretched thin trying to counter these constant attacks, forced to defend supply lines and vulnerable settlements everywhere at once. This pressure revealed a crucial weakness. Hannibal's army wasn't invincible, it depended on a complex network of resources now systematically threatened. How could he sustain his campaign? Then, unsettling news arrived from a Numidian scout, carried on tense voices. He'd observed a significant Roman force maneuvering through the hills, seemingly undetected. This wasn't just another raid, it suggested a larger flanking maneuver. A potential trap to cut off Hannibal's retreat back towards Gaul. And with lines of communication already strained, could this signal the beginning of the end? Hannibal, ever the master of deception, knew he had to act swiftly. He ordered a carefully staged decoy attack, a feint designed to draw Roman attention away from his true intentions. While the legions were distracted, a small detachment would be dispatched into the hills for reconnaissance, seeking truth behind this ominous maneuver. But could such an elaborate ruse fool the Romans? The reconnaissance force returned with a chilling revelation. The Roman flanking maneuver was a deception. It was a clever diversion intended to lure Carthaginian forces away from Rome itself. The legions weren't planning an assault. They were exploiting Hannibal's fear of being outflanked. A psychological gambit designed to divide and conquer. But had Hannibal fallen for it? As Hannibal raced back to his main camp, he walked directly into a renewed Roman assault, a brutal wave exploiting the chaos caused by his decoy and the scouts' absence. Carefully crafted defenses were overwhelmed in a whirlwind of steel and fury. It was precisely what the Romans had been waiting for. A moment of vulnerability. What could Hannibal possibly do to stem the tide? Hannibal's troops fought with unwavering courage, but they were slowly being pushed back under relentless pressure. The constant raids, stretched supply lines, and now this brutal assault. It was all taking its toll back. Cracks began to appear in their morale, the legendary Carthaginian army teetering on the brink of collapse. Could they rally one last time? Simultaneously, far across the sea in Sicily, hero Circe's forces suffered a devastating blow. Renewed Roman naval power crushed his fleet, severely weakening Carthage's overall war effort and potentially isolating Hannibal's army. The lifeline to reinforcements and supplies was severed. A crippling setback at a crucial moment. What would this mean for Hannibal's chances of victory? News of Hiero's defeat reached Hannibal, a crushing blow that further demoralized his wary troops. Dissent began to spread through the ranks, muttering and accusations replacing earlier camaraderie. Was all hope lost? Could anything possibly turn the tide against such a relentless Roman onslaught? That desire solidified into a sacred vow. Surrounded by Carthaginian elders and priests, a young Hannibal stood before the altar of Baal Hammon. He swore an oath, a solemn promise etched into his very being, to avenge Carthage's losses, crush Rome's power, and dedicate his life to their destruction. It was more than just a pledge, it became a destiny he would relentlessly pursue. Recognizing the dire situation, Hannibal made a desperate gamble, a daring night raid on a Roman supply depot. It was a long shot, but it might buy him time, restore hope to his troops, and perhaps regain momentum. But would this reckless maneuver succeed? Or lead them straight into another trap? The night raid initially felt like a victory, a swift strike against the outlying Roman settlements. But that fleeting success quickly vanished. A few hours later, the countryside echoed with the tramp of Roman legions. Reinforcements arrived far faster than Hannibal anticipated. What followed was brutal, a desperate, bloody clash in the darkness where men were swallowed by the night. The cost was staggering. How could he possibly replace those losses? Among those lost in that desperate fight was Hannibal, Hannibal's most trusted lieutenant, a man whose counsel he valued above almost all others. With him gone, the weight of command felt heavier than ever. Who would now stand beside him, offering honest advice when times were darkest? A chilling silence fell over the Carthaginian camp. A palpable sense of unease settled in. Far from the battlefield, Fabius Maximus watched intently. He'd seen the raid's success and then its devastating collapse, the frantic fighting, the heavy losses. Hannibal was bleeding, his confidence shaken. This wasn't just a setback, it felt like an opportunity to finally deliver. The crushing blow he had been waiting for, but could he seize it? The losses were undeniable, and discontent simmered within Hannibal's ranks. He knew he couldn't maintain this campaign indefinitely. Preparations for a retreat began quietly at first. It was a grim prospect. Staying meant certain destruction. Could he lead his army out of Italy, or was Rome simply too powerful? Then came the telltale signs, subtle shifts in Roman patrols, and the absence of expected foraging parties. Roman scouts had detected movement. Hannibal's army was preparing to break camp. A desperate chase across Italy was about to begin. But what if Rome wouldn't let him go? How far would they push to keep him contained? The retreat started under the cloak of darkness, a desperate gamble to evade pursuit. Hannibal's priority was clear elephants and siege equipment first. Everything else, expendable. Leaving behind the wounded, the non-essential baggage, it was a heartbreaking decision that stung his soldiers deeply. And what impact would this have on morale? Recognizing the severity of Hannibal's movements, Fabius Maximus acted swiftly. Riders were dispatched to Spain carrying a vital message for Scipio Africanus, a young general known for his tactical brilliance. It was a long shot, a gamble on someone he hadn't always trusted. Could Scipio coordinate effectively across such vast distances? The retreat was far from orderly, and constant harassment by small Roman detachments slowed Hannibal's progress to a crawl. Each skirmish drained his already depleted resources. The chase was relentless. Rome wasn't giving up easily. Every mile became a battle for survival. Then came the ultimate betrayal. A Carthaginian deserter led a Roman cavalry unit to an unsuspecting foraging party. The ensuing skirmish was brief but devastating, another costly blow to Hannibal's dwindling strength. How could he trust anyone now? It felt as though everything was conspiring against him. Fate, however, can be cruel. Hannibal Barca died suddenly during an expedition to Spain. This created a dangerous instability within Carthage's leadership, a vacuum that threatened the Barcid family's holdings. With his father gone, the future of their Iberian territories hung precariously in the balance. Who would step forward and maintain control? That question became all-consuming for those who knew Hamilcar's plans. Hannibal turned toward the Apennine Mountains, hoping their rugged terrain would offer some respite from his pursuers. But the passes were treacherous, narrow and unforgiving. The baggage train struggled, wagons splintered against rocks. Even the elephants faltered. It seemed even nature itself was arrayed against him. Could he possibly escape now? The Alps presented a brutal challenge, but descending into Italy brought new horrors. Sickness spread rapidly through Hannibal's ranks. Dysentery, fever, and even simple wounds festered without care. Supplies dwindled, forcing desperate foraging. Despair is a powerful enemy, and it began to take hold. How could an army celebrated for its victory simply crumble from disease and hunger? The men started to question everything. Constant hardship bred resentment, and resentment festers. A small faction, mostly Gallic warriors accustomed to challenging authority, openly confronted Hannibal's lieutenants. They questioned the strategy. Their endless retreat. Whispers turned into accusations. Was Hannibal leading them to slaughter? The threat of mutiny hung heavy in the air, a dangerous prospect for any commander. Hannibal understood the danger. He met with the Gallic leaders in a tense standoff under the Italian sun. His words were carefully chosen, a blend of reassurance and veiled threats. Promises of glory, reminders of their oaths, but also hints of consequences if they disobeyed. The mutiny was quelled, for now, but underlying discontent remained, a constant worry. Fabius Maximus hadn't disappeared. The cunctator, the delayer, continued his relentless pursuit. He shadowed Hannibal's movements like a persistent shadow. Instead of direct battle, he harassed and provoked, slowly wearing down the Carthaginian army. Now, Fabius forced them into a narrow mountain valley, where Roman archers rained arrows upon the exposed ranks. Another setback. Another layer of misery piled onto their already heavy burden. Trapped and with casualties mounting, Hannibal knew he had to act. He ordered a desperate gamble, an elephant charge against the Roman lines. A suicidal maneuver. Perhaps? But what choice did he have? These colossal beasts were his last, best chance of breaking free. Could they break through the Roman formation? Or would they be slaughtered in a futile display of power? The charge worked briefly. The sheer size of the elephants shattered the Roman lines, creating an opening for Hannibal's army to escape. But it came at a terrible cost. Several valuable elephants lay dead or wounded on the battlefield. Countless Carthaginian soldiers were trampled underfoot. A victory. Yes, but a Pyrrhic one. A triumph bought with devastating losses. How many more could they afford to lose? The situation was dire. One of Hannibal's remaining cavalry commanders, hardened by years of war, offered a brutal assessment: abandon the main army. Try to reach North Africa with what remained. It was a bitter pill to swallow. An admission of defeat. Could he really leave his men behind? Or was it the only way to salvage something from this disastrous campaign? The thought of abandoning his troops haunted Hannibal's dreams. It was a betrayal of everything he stood for, a leader leaving his men to die. But clinging to hope meant certain annihilation for everyone. Could he risk it all on a futile quest? Was preserving himself, and perhaps the possibility of future campaigns, worth such a sacrifice? The Romans were always watching. Roman scouts discovered traces of Hannibal's internal debate, discarded maps with hastily drawn routes, intercepted messages revealing his doubts. Fabius Maximus now had a clear picture of Hannibal's desperation and dwindling options. The hunter was closing in, the prey was weakening. Fortunately, Hamilcar's legacy wouldn't disappear entirely. His brother Hasdrubal stepped into the void, taking command of their Iberian territories. He continued Hamilcar's work, relentlessly expanding Carthaginian influence through diplomacy and military strength. He built roads to connect settlements, established trade routes, and forged alliances with local tribes, laying the groundwork for a formidable base of power across Iberia. The weight of responsibility, pleas from his officers, the grim reality staring him in the face, became unbearable. Hannibal reluctantly agreed to split his forces, a desperate gamble to increase their chances of survival. However slim, a heartbreaking choice, a leader forced to abandon those who had followed him for so long. What future awaited them now? Desperate to escape the Roman shadow, Hannibal risked everything with another Alpine crossing. Could he possibly navigate those treacherous peaks again? It was a desperate bid for freedom, a final chance to strike back at Rome from his homeland. Yet, this time, the Romans were prepared. Hannibal knew failure meant crushing Carthage's hopes forever. The snow-capped mountains loomed, a formidable barrier between him and Africa. As Hannibal's main force moved, another contingent was deliberately left behind, a risky sacrifice. Their plan: draw the Roman legions away from the Alps. Knowing they were outmatched, a loyal, but less experienced general commanded them now. They faced certain destruction, a price paid to buy Hannibal precious time. How long could this distraction last? Fabius Maximus, ever the pragmatist, seized upon this division and launched an attack against the isolated Carthaginian force. The result was devastating. Heavy losses further crippled Hannibal's army, tightening Rome's grip on Carthage. It seemed that even amidst Hannibal's genius, Roman persistence would be his undoing. As Hannibal began his ascent, something shifted within him. The harsh landscape mirrored the turmoil in his soul. Visions haunted him: fallen comrades, lost victories, broken promises. What demons now tormented the great general? Was it merely exhaustion or a deeper psychological toll? The Alpine crossing proved even more brutal than before. Blizzards raged, avalanches thundered down the slopes, and hostile tribes ambushed his weary troops. Each mile was a battle against nature itself. Hannibal's army dwindled with every step, their strength blood away by the unforgiving mountains. What would be left of them when they reached the other side? High on a ridge, a lone Roman scout spotted Hannibal's beleaguered force. He paused, weighing his options. Should he attack these weakened remnants of an army, or report back to Fabius and risk alerting them to his presence? A moment of moral reckoning for the young soldier, one that could alter the course of the war. Then came another crushing blow. A snowstorm ripped through the mountains, severing Hannibal's lifeline. He lost contact with his baggage train, condemning countless soldiers to starvation. Utter despair descended upon the ranks. Docks. How could they possibly continue without food? Hope seemed as distant as the African plains. News finally reached Rome: Hannibal's disastrous retreat and the destruction of his secondary force. A wave of jubilation swept through the city, victory seeming within grasp. The Senate celebrated, believing Carthage was on its knees. Could this truly be the end of Hannibal's threat? At last, Hannibal emerged from the mountains, but he was a shadow of his former self. Thousands more men lost to the Alps, his army shattered and depleted. Far removed from the triumphant general who once dared to invade Italy. What now? Could Carthage possibly rise again? Yet, even Hasdrubal's efforts couldn't prevent the inevitable. Another crisis struck Pac. He was assassinated, a sudden loss that threw Iberia into further turmoil. With no clear successor and Carthaginian factions vying for control, a desperate choice had to be made. Despite his youth, Hannibal Barca was unexpectedly chosen as commander, an extraordinary gamble with potentially devastating consequences. Despite the devastation, despite the loss, Hannibal's spirit remained unbroken. He vowed to rebuild Carthage's strength and exact revenge upon Rome, a lingering threat on the horizon. But could he rise again? The seeds of future conflict had been sown in the snow and blood of the Alps. The journey back was humbling. Hannibal returned to Carthage, not as a conquering hero, but diminished bucks. The cheering crowds he'd envisioned never appeared, only cautious curiosity and wary glances. He'd broken the Roman Republic, yes, but failed to secure victory. That disappointment lingered in the air, his influence visibly waning. It wasn't how he'd pictured it after all those years. The Carthaginian Senate was fractured. Some urged renewed negotiations with Rome, a desperate bid to salvage what remained of their empire. Others, remembering Hannibal's initial successes, believed he could still turn the tide. But after 2 decades of war and staggering losses, fear dominated the debate. Could Carthage risk further conflict? Or was peace, however unfavorable, the only path forward? The elders were profoundly divided. Hannibal understood he needed allies, resources, and to regain his standing in Carthage. So, subtly, almost imperceptibly, he began working the room. The whispers of Roman aggression, exaggerated tales of their plans for Carthaginian territory, were strategically leaked. Playing on old fears, fanning the embers of resentment, it was a slow game, but one he knew well. But how much influence could he regain? News trickled in from Italy, unsettling news. Rome wasn't celebrating a decisive victory. They were consolidating gains and strengthening fortifications. They seemed far from finished, not at all what Hannibal had hoped for. The war hadn't ended, it was merely shifting. Hannibal needed money. And he knew where to find it, among Carthaginian merchants, chafing under Roman trade dominance. He promised them disruption and opportunity, a chance to break free from Rome's stranglehold. A clandestine agreement was reached, funds flowed in quietly, secretly. With that money, Hannibal began rebuilding his army, a shadow force preparing for what lay ahead. But money wasn't enough. Hannibal needed allies. Secretly, very secretly, he dispatched scouts and envoys across North Africa. Even venturing into Gaul, he sought tribes simmering with resentment towards Roman expansion. Those who felt the sting of Roman taxes and authority. A network of potential collaborators began to take shape. Then came a shocking discovery. A Carthaginian diplomat, exploring peace terms with Rome, stumbled upon evidence of Hannibal's clandestine preparations, the hidden funding and alliances. He realized Carthage wasn't merely seeking peace, it was preparing for war. This revelation sparked a dangerous conflict within Carthage itself. The diplomat attempted to warn the Carthaginian Senate, but Hannibal anticipated him. But a carefully orchestrated propaganda campaign began, whispers questioning the diplomat's loyalty and suggesting he was a Roman sympathizer. His credibility crumbled. The truth became obscured by doubt and suspicion. It was a battle for public opinion, and Hannibal was winning. Hannibal needed to test Rome's resolve, so he orchestrated minor raids along the border in Africa. These were small-scale attacks designed to provoke a response and justify his military buildup. It was a calculated risk, a way to demonstrate Carthaginian strength and rally potential allies. What would Rome do? The young commander quickly proved himself worthy. Hannibal's victories in Iberia were swift and decisive, a testament to his innate tactical brilliance. He inspired fierce loyalty among his troops, who recognized his skill and unwavering commitment to their success. It wasn't just about winning battles. It was about understanding the enemy and exploiting every weakness, a quality that would define his future campaigns. Rome responded cautiously, dispatching a limited punitive expedition that was easily repelled. It wasn't a resounding victory, but it was enough to reinforce the perception of Carthaginian resilience and embolden other potential allies. Was this merely a reprieve, or could a new era of conflict be brewing? The tremors of Hannibal's defeat in Italy hadn't truly settled. Instead, they sparked something unexpected. Across Gaul, tribes still seething under Roman rule saw a chance, a glimmer of hope that Carthage might yet offer liberation. Whispers turned to plans and warriors began to answer the call, drawn by promises of support and the dream of throwing off Roman chains. But could Hannibal truly deliver? Or were these tribes being led into another devastating conflict? Hannibal's army wasn't the juggernaut it once was. Years of campaigning had taken their toll, resources were scarce, and numbers dwindled. But something crucial shifted. He didn't rebuild with brute force, he refined. New recruits underwent rigorous training, learning from past mistakes, how to anticipate Roman tactics, how to conserve supplies, how to fight as a truly unified fighting force. This wasn't just an army, it was a lesson in resilience and strategic adaptation. Hannibal needed more than just soldiers. He needed the backing of Carthage itself. The Senate, wary after years of costly war, initially resisted the guy. But Hannibal's supporters were relentless, arguing that a renewed effort was vital for Carthaginian survival. Economic hardship at home amplified their pressure. Ultimately, reluctantly, and with considerable debate, the scales tipped in Hannibal's favor. He received authorization to raise troops again. Hannibal understood the power of perception. He orchestrated a public spectacle, a demonstration of Carthaginian military strength that hadn't been seen in years. The newly trained army marched through the streets, their discipline and skill on full display. It was more than just an exercise, it was a message to Carthage's doubters. A declaration of his renewed power, and a silencing of dissent. News of Hannibal's resurgence couldn't be contained. Intelligence reports filtering back to Rome painted a disturbing picture, a revitalized army, renewed alliances with disgruntled Gauls. The Roman Senate erupted in heated debate. How should they respond? Was it time for another expedition to Africa? Or could diplomacy still avert disaster? The question hung heavy, demanding an immediate and decisive answer. Rome's response was swift, though controversial. Scipio Africanus, the son of the man who had previously commanded Roman forces in Africa, was dispatched with a new army. He carried the weight of expectation to finally deal with Hannibal and quell the unrest that threatened Rome's dominance. A young commander, tasked with an immense responsibility, could he succeed where his father faltered? Scipio's arrival wasn't universally welcomed in Rome. Some senators argued that negotiation with Hannibal was still possible, that a full-scale military confrontation would be too costly, both in lives and resources. These voices of caution created deep divisions within the Senate, hindering a unified response, and threatening to undermine Scipio's mission from the start. Hannibal, never one to wait for events to unfold, launched a daring offensive into Numidia, seizing vital resources and strategically positioning his forces. This wasn't just about securing supplies, it was about threatening Roman territories in Africa, a bold gamble designed to force Rome's hand. Could this aggressive move break the stalemate, or would it backfire spectacularly? Scipio recognized Hannibal's threat immediately. He responded decisively, launching his own counter-offensive to disrupt Carthaginian supply lines and engage the enemy in battle. The stage was now set for a new confrontation, one that would determine the fate of Carthage and Rome's dominance over Africa. But Hannibal was more than just a warrior. He was also an astute observer. During diplomatic missions to Roman cities, He meticulously studied their political landscape, their rivalries, their ambitions, and their vulnerabilities. He listened carefully to their boasts and complaints, storing away every detail for future use. He realized Rome wasn't invincible, it simply needed a crack in its armor. The initial clashes between Scipio's forces and Hannibal's army were brutal, yet inconclusive. Both commanders demonstrated remarkable skill and resilience, a testament to years of experience on the battlefield. Neither side gained a clear advantage, leaving the conflict in a tense stalemate. What would it take to break this deadlock? And how much longer could both empires sustain such costly warfare? Hannibal's grip on North Africa was weakening. He'd relied heavily on Numidian support, but their tribal rivalries proved a constant challenge. Could he manipulate these divisions to his advantage? Hannibal subtly backed opposing factions within Numidia, fueling conflict and diverting resources. It was a dangerous game, playing one tribe against another, buying him precious time, at least for now. While Hannibal wrestled with internal strife, Scipio tightened his noose. He understood that crippling Carthage meant severing its supply lines. A bold naval blockade was initiated, Roman ships sealing off Carthaginian ports. This immediately strangled Hannibal's ability to resupply his army in Africa. Without reinforcements or provisions, the situation became increasingly desperate. The writing was on the wall. Hannibal's once vast army was depleted, demoralized, and desperately low on everything. He knew a final stand was inevitable. But could a general who defied Rome for so long pull off one last miracle? The end drew near. Scipio wasn't about to let Hannibal regroup. He needed a decisive battle. But how? A risky plan was hatched: surprise attacks on isolated Carthaginian outposts, the goal. To provoke Hannibal into revealing his position and engaging in open combat. It was a gamble. Could he draw the legendary general into a trap? The clash finally came. Hannibal and Scipio, two titans of warfare, faced off. The fate of Carthage, perhaps even Western civilization, hung precariously in the balance. Would history repeat itself? Could Hannibal once again snatch victory from defeat? The initial impact was brutal. Hannibal's veteran infantry, wary but hardened by years of campaigning, met Scipio's legions head-on. The fighting was fierce, a chaotic maelstrom of steel and blood. The casualties mounted quickly on both sides. A grim testament to the skill of these warriors. Hannibal anticipated Scipio's tactics, recognizing his opponent's brilliance. Scipio attempted a feigned retreat, hoping to lure Hannibal's cavalry into a trap. But Hannibal anticipated the move perfectly. He refused the bait, remaining steadfast in his defensive position. The veteran general would not be fooled. Then came another blow. Sensing impending defeat, Hannibal's Numidian allies began to desert the battlefield, slipping away under cover of smoke. It was a devastating loss of manpower, weakening his flanks considerably and exposing vulnerable points. Scipio seized this critical moment. With Hannibal's right flank crumbling, he launched a concentrated attack. Pushing relentlessly against the weakened defenses, slowly but surely they began to yield ground. The Carthaginian line was fracturing. Then came the audacious plan, the seemingly impossible journey. Hannibal decided to strike at Rome's heart, not by sea, but by land. Crossing the formidable Alps with an army including tens of thousands of infantry, cavalry, and unbelievably, war elephants. The logistical challenges were staggering: blizzards, treacherous terrain, hostile tribes. It seemed like utter madness. Desperate to stabilize his collapsing line, Hannibal made one last gamble. He unleashed his war elephants into the fray, hoping to break through the Roman ranks and sow chaos. But would this reckless maneuver save him, or only lead to a more catastrophic downfall? It was a gamble, Hannibal's final desperate throw of the dice, unleashing his elephants against Scipio's legions. But it backfired spectacularly. Panic erupted as these massive beasts, unable to distinguish friend from foe, trampled Carthaginian and Roman alike. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. No coordinated attack could possibly form amidst such carnage. Hannibal watched, helpless, as his carefully laid plans crumbled underfoot. The Roman legions, battered but unbroken, had weathered the elephant charge. And now they saw their opportunity. A gap opened in Hannibal's center, a chink in his armor. Fa. Exploiting this moment of utter confusion, Scipio's men surged forward, driving a wedge straight through the Carthaginian lines. Could Hannibal rally his troops and close that breach before it became irreparable? Doc. Hannibal reacted swiftly, throwing his remaining reserves into a counter-attack. Doc? But Scipio was prepared. His legions, strengthened by reinforcements, formed an impenetrable wall. Doc. The clash was brutal, relentless, and ultimately futile. Doc. It wasn't just about numbers, it was about discipline and training, the Roman advantage proving decisive. But how much longer could Hannibal sustain this desperate struggle? Even as Hannibal's main force faltered, pockets of Carthaginian soldiers fought on, individual acts of incredible bravery against overwhelming odds. They refused to surrender, clinging to a hope that was rapidly fading. But there was simply no escape. The Roman legions were relentless in their advance. What drove these men to fight so fiercely when defeat was inevitable? The reality crashed down on Hannibal. His army was collapsing. He knew prolonging the battle would only lead to further slaughter. With a heavy heart, he gave the order retreat towards Zama. A desperate maneuver, not of victory, but of survival. Could he rally his forces and somehow turn the tide again? Scipio didn't let Hannibal escape. His cavalry, led by the formidable Massinissa, relentlessly pursued the retreating army. Every attempt to regroup was thwarted, every avenue of escape blocked. The chase began, a relentless pursuit that would strip Hannibal bare. Would this pursuit finally seal Carthage's fate? Across the vast North African plains, Hannibal's once proud army was scattered, harried by Massinissa's relentless cavalry. The remnants of his legions were reduced to small, isolated bands, desperately trying to evade capture. Their power... They were no longer an army, but prey. How could they possibly survive this brutal chase? Hannibal finally reached Zama. But it wasn't a sanctuary. He found himself facing not only Scipio's legions, but also the combined forces of Numidian allies, now fully aligned with Rome. Isolation tightened its grip. Carthage was truly alone. Was this the end? The inevitable began. Negotiations started between Hannibal and Scipio, a formal acknowledgement of Roman dominance. Carthage had no choice but to concede. The shadow of surrender loomed large over their once proud city. What terms would Rome demand, and how much humiliation awaited them? News of Hannibal's audacious crossing reached Rome, and was largely dismissed. Confident in their military might, the Roman Senate viewed it as a minor raid, an insignificant disturbance on the borders of their vast empire. They underestimated him. They failed to grasp the scale of his ambition and the depth of his determination. A fatal error. The treaty was harsh. Carthage would dismantle its fleet, pay a crippling indemnity, a debt that would cripple their economy for generations, and relinquish all territories outside Africa. Humiliation complete. The dream of Carthaginian empire lay shattered, buried beneath the weight of Roman power. What future now awaited the once mighty city? Could Hannibal truly rally those who once stood by him? Back in Carthage, the treaty with Rome had fractured the Senate. Some still clung to hope for a renewed challenge, but years of Roman dominance took their toll. He pleaded his case, argued for defiance. Yet the fire had gone out. The older generation remembered the cost too well. The devastation, the loss. Hannibal's influence, once absolute, began to crumble, leaving him increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Facing accusations of treason from those who feared Roman retribution, Hannibal made an impossible choice. Flight. It wasn't a triumphant departure, it was desperate. Leaving behind his family, his home, everything he'd known, he slipped away under the cover of darkness. A small retinue accompanied him. Loyal but few. He knew Rome wouldn't let him live, not while he represented a potential threat. So he vanished into the shadows, becoming a fugitive from both Carthage and his former enemies. Where would a man like Hannibal find sanctuary? He sought refuge in the east, wandering from court to court, first to Antiochus III of Syria, then to Prusias I of Bithynia. Each ruler saw an opportunity, a potential ally against Rome's ever-expanding power. But these were fleeting alliances, built on shifting sands of political expediency. Hannibal remained a ghost, a shadow in the east, always plotting, always waiting for his chance. Rumors followed Hannibal like a persistent plague. Tales of secret correspondence, clandestine meetings, they stoked Roman anxieties. Was he raising armies? Forging alliances? Even whispers could spark panic in the Senate dock. Each rumor fueled their paranoia, reminding them that even in exile, Hannibal remained a potent threat, an ember refusing to be extinguished. Rome wouldn't simply ignore these whispers. They demanded Hannibal's extradition from Bithynia, a diplomatic bombshell. King Prusias, caught between Roman power and the lure of an ally in Hannibal, found himself in an impossible position. The delicate balance shifted, tensions soared. Rome's relentless pursuit had cornered Hannibal once more, tightening the noose around his freedom. Trapped, with no escape in sight, Hannibal faced an unthinkable choice. Capture by Rome meant humiliation, a public spectacle. A prisoner paraded through the streets he once terrorized. It was a fate worse than death. And so, rather than endure that indignity, he chose his own end, taking poison. A final act of defiance against the Republic that had haunted him for decades. The news reached Rome and Carthage like a thunderclap. Hannibal was dead. The man who dared to challenge Rome's dominion had finally met his end. Not on the battlefield, but in quiet desperation. It marked the definitive closing of a chapter, a brilliant military career extinguished by political maneuvering and relentless pursuit. An era had ended. What truly defines a legacy? Experts argue that Hannibal's military genius remains undeniable. His strategies still studied in academies centuries later. But his ambition, his relentless pursuit of victory, ultimately contributed to the downfall of Carthage. He was a brilliant tactician, yes, but also a catalyst for destruction, a complex and tragic figure. Was Scipio's victory at Zama purely down to Hannibal's miscalculations? Or did Rome possess an inherent advantage, a deeper resilience, greater resources that ultimately proved insurmountable? Historians debate whether it was a single blunder or the culmination of years of Roman strength. Perhaps it was both. A perfect storm of military brilliance and relentless power. Hannibal unleashed his fury upon the Trebia River Valley. The Roman legions, led by Tiberius Sempronius Longus, marched to meet him, and were utterly crushed. A devastating defeat that shook Rome to its core, a stunning display of Hannibal's tactical genius and ruthless efficiency. But was this merely the beginning? What would Hannibal do next? The Punic Wars, they reshaped the ancient world. Hannibal's invasion was more than just a military campaign. It was a clash of civilizations, an epic struggle for dominance. His legacy continues to resonate, a cautionary tale about ambition, resilience, and the enduring consequences of conflict. But what lessons can we truly draw from his extraordinary life? That's something history will continue to ponder. Hannibal's death wasn't a Roman victory. It served as a catalyst. News of his demise in Zama rippled across Bithynia, immediately sparking fear among those who sheltered him. They knew Rome wouldn't forget their complicity. Desperate men began plotting escapes, scrambling for any chance to avoid retribution. Could they simply disappear? The gamble was immense: betrayal or annihilation. Rome didn't waste a moment. With Bithynia thrown into chaos, Roman diplomats moved swiftly, exploiting the uncertainty to their advantage. King Antiochus III, already wary of Carthaginian influence, found himself under immense pressure. Pressure he couldn't easily resist. Relinquishing territories and assets was the price for maintaining peace with Rome, effectively severing what remained of Carthage's eastern lifeline. What did this mean for Roman ambitions in the region? Looking at a map today, it's startlingly clear how Hannibal's death reshaped the eastern Mediterranean. Without him as a constant threat, Rome's power consolidated with surprising speed. Carthage simply couldn't recover. How much more could they have achieved had he lived? It marked a strategic shift, one where Roman dominance wasn't just asserted, it was cemented. Antiochus II's later actions tell the whole story. He became considerably more cautious when confronting Rome, his decisions dictated by a new reality. Hannibal's absence had fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape. A new era dawned. where challenging Roman power seemed almost suicidal. But what was lost in that caution? Surprisingly, new letters have surfaced revealing a secret Roman perspective. Some senators, men who had fought against him for decades, privately lamented Hannibal's death. They recognized his brilliance. A worthy adversary gone. Was Rome diminished by his absence? The loss of such an opponent was undoubtedly felt, even within the Senate. Hannibal's legacy wasn't entirely extinguished. Future generations of Roman generals studied his tactics, his innovative strategies for maneuvering troops and exploiting terrain. They adapted those principles, incorporating them into their own campaigns to maintain Rome's military edge. Lessons learned from defeat are often the most valuable lessons. Wouldn't you agree? Hannibal's legend became ingrained in Roman culture, shaping their mindset. His campaigns instilled a deep sense of preparedness and awareness that even the mighty could fall. This fostered a society that prized resilience and vigilance. But did this constant fear ultimately define them? It certainly left its mark. Rome, ever conscious of narrative control, ensured that Scipio Africanus's triumphs were prominently displayed with grand monuments. Hannibal's achievements. They were deliberately downplayed, almost erased from public memory. A careful rewriting of history was underway, a subtle but powerful form of propaganda. Looking back, Hannibal's invasion echoes through military history. His strategic innovations remain relevant even now. Yet his grand vision ultimately failed, crushed by the weight of Roman power. Isn't that a recurring pattern? Brilliant ideas meeting insurmountable obstacles. The cycle continues. The dust settled after Trebia, leaving a bitter taste of defeat for Rome. Hannibal didn't pause to celebrate, he turned south, towards the heart of Italy. But as his army marched, something unexpected happened. Fear gripped Rome. Gog. Could this Carthaginian general, who'd already crushed their legions twice, truly threaten the city itself? The Senate panicked. What would they do? Back in Carthage, resentment simmered beneath the surface. The ruling oligarchy was blamed for failing to support Hannibal, for leading them to ruin and destruction. These feelings festered, planting seeds of rebellion against a system that many now viewed as corrupt and incompetent. What would become of Carthage's future? What happens after the hero falls? After Hannibal's death, a strange quiet settled over Carthage, but it wasn't peace. Archaeological digs are now revealing something unsettling, evidence of rising social tensions and growing unrest within the city itself. It seems Hannibal's long shadow cast more than just military defeat. It exposed deep cracks in Carthaginian society. People were questioning their leaders, their system, a dangerous kind of questioning that would soon have devastating consequences. Hannibal's campaign had been a brutal drain on Carthage's resources, hadn't it? Historians now understand just how crippling that war truly was. The Kia. Years of relentless conflict didn't just cost lives. They crippled the economy and left vital infrastructure in ruins. Roads crumbled, trade routes vanished, and the once mighty Carthaginian treasury was depleted, a fatal wound inflicted long before Rome finally delivered the killing blow. Imagine the weight of that loss. Animated charts show just how unevenly the burden of war fell across Carthaginian families. Farms were abandoned, businesses failed, and poverty spread like wildfire. The gap between the wealthy elite who profited from trade and the ordinary citizens struggling to survive widened dramatically, fueling resentment and unrest. It wasn't simply about losing a battle. It was about losing hope. So, was Rome's final act against Carthage inevitable? Many historians argue that the Third Punic War wasn't just about revenge. It was the unavoidable consequence of unresolved tensions left simmering after Hannibal's defeat. Rome wasn't content with a weakened enemy. They craved absolute dominance, and they were determined to eliminate any potential future threat, no matter the cost. The siege itself, a chilling display of Roman power. Ancient texts paint a grim picture: the relentless bombardment, the systematic destruction. Rome's technological advantage was undeniable. Their engineering skills and logistical capabilities were unmatched. It wasn't just about conquering Carthage. It was about erasing it from existence. A brutal efficiency that left no room for mercy. But even in destruction, a legacy endures. Today, Hannibal's burial site in Labissa, it's become more than just a tomb, it's a place of pilgrimage. People from all over the world travel there to honor his military genius and mourn the loss of Carthage, a testament to the enduring power of a man who dared to challenge an empire. What does this reverence say about our own understanding of heroism? Fragments of pottery, intricate jewelry, these recovered Carthaginian artifacts whisper stories of lives lived and lost. They offer poignant glimpses into the everyday experiences of ordinary citizens, caught in the crossfire of a devastating conflict, their hopes, their fears, their struggles. Personal stories resurfacing from beneath centuries of dust. Was it truly a victory for civilization? Or was it something else entirely? A brutal demonstration of imperial power? Historians continue to debate Rome's actions, wrestling with the moral complexities of conquest and the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition. Was this triumph or tragedy? Conflict, it seems to be woven into the very fabric of human existence. Hannibal's invasion, Rome's response, they echo throughout history, reminders of our enduring drive for power and conquest. It's a cyclical pattern, isn't it? A constant ebb and flow of ambition, conflict, and ultimately, loss. The traditionalists in the Senate saw only one answer: Fabius Maximus Cunctator, the delayer. He wasn't a flashy general eager for glory. Fabius believed direct confrontation would be disastrous, advocating instead for a war of attrition, slowly strangling Hannibal's resources. This strategy was deeply unpopular among many senators who wanted action. But with so much at stake, they reluctantly agreed to put their faith in the cautious Fabian approach. Rome may have ultimately prevailed, but Hannibal's legacy remains a powerful reminder of what it means to challenge an empire and the enduring cost of ambition. He continues to inspire and provoke uncomfortable questions about war, power, and the very nature of civilization itself. What lessons can we truly learn from his story? Perhaps that's a question worth considering long after the dust settles. Fabius's scorched earth tactics were infuriating for Hannibal, forcing him to forage and raid instead of marching freely. It also stretched his supply lines thin, a slow bleed rather than a fatal wound. But the constant harassment wasn't breaking the Carthaginian army, so what would Hannibal do? He needed to find a way to break free from this frustrating stalemate. Hannibal's response was a daring gamble. He turned his army south, deeper into Italy. He knew that beyond Roman control lay discontent, tribes and communities, simmering with resentment towards Roman rule. It was a risky move. Leaving the north meant abandoning potential targets. But it offered something more valuable: potential allies. And they came. The Bruchians, fiercely independent warriors, pledged their support. Then others followed: Lucanians, Samnites, each tribe adding fresh troops and vital supplies to Hannibal's growing army. Suddenly, the Carthaginian force wasn't just a foreign invasion, it was becoming an Italian coalition. But could this ragtag band truly challenge Rome? Reinforced by these new warriors, Hannibal's army began a slow, deliberate march north. Campania, a fertile region with vital resources, became their next target. It wasn't about speed anymore, it was about sustaining the campaign, gathering supplies and consolidating his gains. Each step forward felt like a challenge to Rome. Roman scouts, however, weren't blind. They reported Hannibal's movements back to Fabius Maximus, who responded with quick, harassing raids, smaller forces attempting to disrupt supply lines without risking a full-scale battle. It was another round in Fabian's game of delay, a constant irritation for Hannibal. But Hannibal anticipated this. Skilled skirmishers and well-placed ambushes repeatedly caught Roman raiding parties off guard, neutralizing them with minimal losses. He understood Fabian's tactics better than the Romans did themselves, proving once again that he was a master of warfare. News of Hannibal's continued successes in Campania spread like wildfire across southern Italy. It wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about hope, the possibility of throwing off Roman rule. Other tribes started to consider joining his cause. Rome's position grew increasingly precarious. Hannibal knew he needed more than just skirmishes to break Rome's grip. He sent envoys north, messengers, carrying promises of autonomy for any tribe that joined his banner. The Samnites, a proud and historically defiant people, were his next target. A risky gamble, certainly, but one with potentially enormous rewards. The Roman Senate was fractured. Fabius's strategy, starving Hannibal out, had bought Rome time. But at what cost? Some senators argued it prolonged the war needlessly. Others feared any aggressive move would be disastrous. Should they risk a direct confrontation with Hannibal's foraging parties in Campania, or continue to bleed him dry slowly? The debate raged on for days, each faction convinced of their righteousness, while Hannibal continued to dictate the terms of engagement. Negotiations with the Samnites were never going to be easy. They'd been squeezed between Rome and Carthage for decades, always playing one side against the other. Now, they saw an opportunity, a chance to throw off Roman dominance. But their leaders weren't simply interested in neutrality. They demanded guarantees. Promises that Rome wouldn't retaliate if they joined Hannibal. Promises that were hard-won. Hannibal understood exactly what was at stake. He knew simply offering alliance wasn't enough. He needed to entice the Samnites with something irresistible. So he upped the ante, promising plunder from Roman territories and a share in any future victories against Rome. It was a dangerous gamble. It would draw more eyes and potentially provoke Rome preemptively. But for Hannibal, securing the Samnite alliance was worth the risk. The negotiations were proceeding cautiously, perhaps too cautiously for some in Rome. A small Roman patrol, eager to disrupt the talks, attempted to ambush Hannibal's envoys as they traveled through the countryside. What followed was a brief, brutal skirmish, a tense moment where one wrong move could have shattered any hope of an agreement and plunged the region back into war. But Hannibal was always several steps ahead. His cavalry, swift and deadly, arrived just in time to scatter the Roman force. The skirmish wasn't about territory or resources. It was a demonstration of power, a clear message that Hannibal controlled the region. It sent tremors through Rome. Could they truly contain this man? Could they win? The message was received loud and clear by the Samnites witnessing Hannibal's dominance, seeing Rome's attempts at interference fail so utterly. They made their decision. They formally pledged allegiance to Carthage, ending centuries of uneasy neutrality. It was a turning point, a game changer that would dramatically alter the course of the war. With the Samnites at his back, Hannibal's army swelled dramatically. Suddenly he had access to more manpower and vital resources than ever before. This wasn't just about adding soldiers, it was about bolstering supply lines, improving logistics, and extending his reach deep into Roman territory. The landscape of the war had fundamentally shifted. Fabius Maximus, always the pragmatist, recognized the gravity of this development. Containing Hannibal was no longer a viable option, not with the Samnites now reinforcing his ranks. He knew Rome's best hope lay in overwhelming force, and he desperately requested reinforcements from other Roman legions across Italy. DC plea born out of necessity. Rome responded, mobilizing legions from across Italy, but moving armies was no easy feat back then. Roads were poor, communication slow, and supplies stretched thin. The process was agonizingly slow. Each day felt like an eternity. As Hannibal consolidated his gains, it created a window of opportunity, one he wouldn't miss. Anticipating Rome's movements, Hannibal launched a series of devastating raids against key supply depots in Apulia. He targeted their weaknesses, disrupting their ability to reinforce their armies and further crippling their war effort. It was a brutal demonstration that even at this late stage, Hannibal remained the master strategist. But what would Rome do next? The destruction of those supply depots hit the Roman legions hard. Provisions dwindled, bellies rumbled, and morale plummeted faster than any arrow. Hannibal understood a starving army is a defeated army. This wasn't just about food, it was about breaking their spirit. A strategic victory, yes, but one with far-reaching consequences for Rome's war effort. And so, Hannibal began to march north again. This time, things were different. His army, bolstered by Samnite and Lucanian allies, felt stronger and more confident. They were better supplied too, as the Romans hadn't disrupted his lines this effectively. he aimed for Campania once more, setting the stage for yet another brutal confrontation. News reached Rome Hannibal was on the move. Gubba. Panic erupted in Campania as cities braced themselves for an invasion. But it wasn't just the prospect of battle that terrified people. Rumors spread like wildfire. Stories of Carthaginian brutality, massacres, and pillaging. Bach. How much of this was truth? And how much was simply fear amplifying every shadow? Fabius Maximus tried to intercept him, as always. But Hannibal was a master of deception and maneuver. He anticipated Fabius's moves, drawing his forces into a tricky chase across the hills. It wasn't a full-blown battle, but another frustrating defeat for Rome, further chipping away at their already fragile morale. Capua, the second largest city in Italy, and now Hannibal's next target. True. Taking Capua wasn't just about conquering another town. It was about seizing a vital strategic stronghold. Its fall would open the way for an advance on Rome itself. A moment that could decide the fate of the war. The siege dragged on, a brutal, grinding affair. Both sides endured heavy losses. The defenders fought with desperate courage. But Hannibal's forces were relentless. It was a grim and terrible reality of war, days blurred into weeks, marked only by the constant clang of steel and the cries of the wounded. But something else was at play within Capua's walls. Betrayal. A faction, disgruntled with Roman rule and lured by promises of Carthaginian favor, opened a gate for Hannibal's forces. It was a devastating blow, undermining the city's defenses from within. An act that would seal its fate. After months of siege, Capua fell. The surrender sent shockwaves through Rome. The news was devastating, a clear signal that the Carthaginian threat wasn't receding, it was growing closer. A vital city in Roman hands, now lost. A significant setback for the Republic. With Capua secured, Hannibal turned his gaze towards Rome. His army was poised to strike at the heart of Roman power. But would he? Could he overcome the city's formidable defenses? The ultimate confrontation loomed. A clash that would decide not just the fate of Rome, but perhaps the entire Western world. Now the citizens of Rome braced themselves. They prepared for what might be their final defense against Hannibal's seemingly unstoppable advance. The city held its breath, every citizen wondering, will Rome fall? Will this be the end of the Republic? Capua had fallen. The news ripped through Rome like a physical blow. Panic seized the Senate, usually so confident and assured of its dominance. The disagreement flared as strategies were debated and discarded. Could they stop Hannibal? Should they fight or flee? It was a paralysis born of fear. And every wasted moment brought Carthage closer. The effect wasn't confined to the Senate. Rome's citizens were terrified. Families, clutching what little they could carry. Valuables, livestock, anything for safety, began pouring out of the city gates. It meant fewer hands to work the fields and fewer soldiers on the walls. A slow bleed of resources just when Rome needed them most. Was there anywhere safe? Hannibal's scouts, men hardened by desert travel, were relentless. They reported back, detailing the city's defenses, or rather, its weaknesses. The hastily repaired walls weren't as formidable as they seemed. And morale was low. Hannibal now knew precisely where to strike, but finding that opening would be crucial. Fabius Maximus, the cunctator, argued for a scorched earth policy, denying Hannibal supplies and wearing him down. He was overruled. The more aggressive faction, led by Quintus Fabius, no relation, believed in direct confrontation. They were convinced they could crush Carthage in open battle, a dangerous gamble to be sure. Despite Capua's resources, Hannibal's army was still struggling to feed itself. The sheer size of his force meant an endless demand for supplies. So, when he began his march toward Rome, it wasn't a swift advance, more like a slow, agonizing crawl, stretching communication lines and making them vulnerable. But each day felt like another step closer to disaster. Roman legions attempted to harass Hannibal's advance with small skirmishes designed to disrupt his supply lines. But they were met with brutal efficiency by the Carthaginian cavalry. Masters of maneuver and ambush. Their speed and skill simply outmatched the Roman infantry. It was a constant reminder of Carthage's military superiority. Back in Rome, discontent simmered just below the surface. Food prices soared as supplies dwindled. Rumors, often exaggerated, of Hannibal's imminent arrival fueled panic. It bred resentment toward the Senate, a sense that they were failing to protect their people. The city was a tinderbox waiting for a spark key. Hannibal wasn't merely a brute force commander, he understood deception as well as tactics. Sending a small detachment to feint an attack, drawing Roman legions away, while the bulk of his army sought a hidden pass through the hills, bringing them closer to Rome than anyone suspected. It was a gamble, but one he calculated with chilling precision. The Romans, believing they had diverted Hannibal's advance, allowed themselves a moment of celebration, a false sense of security. Banners were unfurled, speeches were given, the threat seemed to have passed. They underestimated Hannibal's cunning, and paid dearly for it. Then, unexpectedly, shockingly, Hannibal's main force emerged from the hills near the Porta Appia, the southern gates of Rome. The Romans were caught completely off guard, their defenses unprepared. How had he gotten there? This was no mere advance, it was a devastating surprise attack. But what did Hannibal plan to do next? Rome's southern gates couldn't hold back. Hannibal's initial assault was relentless, a wave crashing against stone. Panic rippled through the Roman ranks as soldiers broke formation, desperately trying to escape the onslaught. It wasn't just the numbers, it was the speed and ferocity of the attack that shattered their resolve. The air filled with screams, the clash of steel, and the terrifying bellows of war elephants, a sound none of these legionaries had ever heard. But then a flicker of hope appeared. A young tribune rallied a small band of soldiers for a desperate counterattack. Breeze. He charged forward, his sword flashing. For a few precious moments, the Carthaginian advance stalled. It wasn't enough to turn the tide, but it bought Rome something invaluable: time, and a renewed sense that this battle might not be lost after all. Hannibal knew how to exploit that brief respite. He unleashed his elephants, monstrous beasts unseen on Italian soil for centuries. The ground trembled as they lumbered forward, their tusks tearing through Roman formations. It was pure terror. The sheer size and power of these animals broke the will of many soldiers, sending them scattering in disarray. Their impact wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The Roman line weakened quickly, and Hannibal's veterans were ready to capitalize. These weren't raw recruits, they were battle-hardened warriors, trained to find and exploit any weakness. But they saw the gaps in the Roman shield wall, moments of hesitation, and pressed their advantage with ruthless efficiency. Rome's famed military discipline crumbled under Hannibal's relentless pressure. The walls were breached, Hannibal's forces poured into Rome. They didn't march in triumph, but descended as invaders into a besieged city. The streets transformed into a labyrinth of war, a brutal close-quarters combat zone where every doorway and alleyway became a potential death trap. It was no longer a battle for territory, it was a fight for survival within the very heart of Rome itself. As professional soldiers clashed, ordinary citizens armed themselves. Kitchen knives, farming tools, anything they could find. They fought with ferocity born of desperation, but were no match for Hannibal's troops. Their courage was undeniable, their fate tragically sealed. It became clear Rome would not be saved by citizen militia alone. The Senate, the embodiment of Roman authority, now faced an unthinkable reality. Desperate to avert total destruction, they sent envoys to negotiate with Hannibal. It was a humiliating act, offering concessions: land, money, autonomy, anything to spare Rome from annihilation. A desperate plea for mercy from a once unconquerable power. But Hannibal wasn't interested in compromise. His ambition extended far beyond territory. He wanted Rome's unconditional surrender, control of the city and its vast resources. He saw an opportunity to crush his enemies completely, to rewrite the map of Italy forever. The terms were clear: Rome would be his. Even as Hannibal's forces tightened their grip, a small band of Roman soldiers refused to yield. They made a final stand within the Temple of Jupiter, the city's most sacred place. It was a futile gesture perhaps, but it represented something enduring: Rome's spirit, its refusal to bow even in the face of utter defeat. The assault on the Temple of Jupiter was inevitable. Duh. Hannibal's troops stormed it. A symbolic blow that reverberated throughout Rome. The heart of their faith, their identity taken. Duh. It wasn't just a military victory, it was a crushing psychological defeat. Duh. Had Rome truly fallen, what would become of its people? The unthinkable was happening. Roman authority, once seemingly unshakable, crumbled under Hannibal's advance. Officials, desperate to save themselves, abandoned the city, leaving ordinary citizens adrift. It wasn't a sudden collapse, more like a slow leak. Each betrayal eroding trust and leaving gaping holes in the fabric of Roman society. Where were the legions? Where was the Senate? The answer was simple: they fled. Could it be real? Hannibal Barca, the scourge of Rome, had breached the city walls. His army marched through the streets, a sea of Carthaginian banners and foreign faces where Roman eagles once flew. The silence was deafening, no cheers, no defiance, just stunned disbelief echoing from shuttered windows. For the first time in centuries, Carthage held dominion over Rome itself, a victory unlike any seen before. Now came the reckoning. The people of Rome, those who hadn't fled, were left to face the consequences of Hannibal's occupation. It wasn't immediate retribution, but a slow grinding down of daily life. Food became scarce, Roman laws were suspended, and Carthaginian officials began imposing their own rules. Life under foreign rule proved far harsher than many had imagined. The symbolism couldn't have been clearer. Hannibal didn't claim the Palatine Hill or Caesar's villa. He moved directly into the Roman Senate building. It was a deliberate act, an audacious declaration that Carthage now controlled Rome's very heart. The place where laws were made and broken was now under Carthaginian command. How would the remaining senators react? The news spread like wildfire. Rome had fallen, sending tremors throughout Italy. Cities loyal to Rome, clinging desperately to their independence, now faced an agonizing choice: would they pledge allegiance to Hannibal? Or would they risk facing the wrath of a triumphant Carthaginian army? The question hung heavy in the air. Hannibal, confident in his victory, tried to establish a provisional Carthaginian government. He expected cooperation, an orderly transition of power. Instead, he was met with cold silence and outright defiance. Roman citizens refused to acknowledge his authority. Silent rebellion simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't going to be as easy as he thought. But resistance wasn't confined to passive defiance. Hidden from view, small pockets of Roman patriots began organizing. Working in the shadows, they planned acts of sabotage, setting fires, disrupting supply lines, and targeting Carthaginian officials. It was a dangerous game, fueled by a potent mixture of resentment and hope. Desperate to quell the growing unrest, Hannibal issued a decree: amnesty for any Roman who swore loyalty to Carthage, a chance at peace, an end to the violence. But his offer was largely rejected. The embers of rebellion burned too brightly, trust had been shattered beyond repair. Could he ever win their hearts? The triumph was starting to feel complicated. Hannibal's supply lines were stretched thin. Feeding and equipping an army within a besieged city proved far more difficult than conquering it. Every grain of wheat, every bolt of linen, had to be hauled across hostile territory. How long could he sustain this occupation? News of Rome's fall reached Syracuse, home to Hero II, one of Rome's most powerful allies. He was now faced with an impossible choice: formally join forces with Carthage, or cling to neutrality and risk becoming a pawn in a much larger game. The fate of Syracuse and perhaps all of Sicily hung precariously in the balance. What would he do? Grain shipments were vital to keeping Rome fed under Carthaginian rule, a constant reminder of their defeat. Dax. But Roman resistance, operating in the shadows, proved remarkably effective. A carefully planned raid crippled one such convoy, scattering supplies and sending a clear message: Hannibal's grip wasn't absolute. This bold act gave hope to those who longed for Roman freedom, showing that defiance was possible, even dangerous. Hannibal, ever the strategist, attempted to negotiate with some of Rome's remaining senators, hoping for a semblance of order and cooperation. He sought recognition of Carthaginian authority, but their response was unwavering. They refused to bend the knee, their defiance echoing throughout the conquered city. This wasn't just about power, it was about principle. Hannibal realized then that ruling Rome wouldn't be achieved through diplomacy, only force. As Hannibal's control tightened, desperation grew amongst his troops. Looting became increasingly common, especially in Rome's poorer districts. It wasn't sanctioned policy, but a symptom of a deeper problem: resentment and instability. Carthaginian soldiers preyed on the vulnerable, stealing what little they had. This only fueled Roman anger, turning ordinary citizens into bitter enemies of their occupiers. Fabius Maximus, the cunctator, the delayer, had wisely withdrawn his legions from Rome before the invasion. Now, far to the south, he began to stir. Gathering what forces he could, he started mobilizing in southern Italy. It wasn't a full-scale army yet, but it was a sign, a promise of resistance, a flicker of hope for a Roman resurgence against Carthaginian dominance. The seeds of dissent were sown even within Rome's elite. A prominent Roman family, deeply influential and wealthy, risked everything to aid the resistance. They secretly contacted Fabius Maximus, providing crucial intelligence, troop movements, supply routes, Hannibal's weaknesses. This was a dangerous game, a betrayal that could cost them their lives. But it proved that not everyone had surrendered. Maintaining control over conquered territories is never easy. Hannibal's Carthaginian allies in southern Italy began to voice their doubts. They questioned his strategy: could they truly hold Rome indefinitely? The costs were mounting. The resources stretched thin. This internal friction threatened to unravel the entire alliance, a fragile coalition built on promises and fear. The Roman resistance wasn't just about hiding in the shadows. They were growing bolder. A daring assassination, a key Carthaginian administrator eliminated in broad daylight, sent shockwaves through Rome. It was a brutal reminder that Hannibal's rule faced constant, lethal opposition. The message was clear: they wouldn't be silenced. Hannibal responded swiftly and harshly. Stricter curfews were imposed, patrols increased. The city felt like a prison under Carthaginian control. Every shadow held the threat of arrest. Every whisper carried the risk of betrayal. This only served to deepen Roman resentment, fueling the flames of rebellion further. Syracuse, ruled by hero Su, had long been an uneasy ally of Rome. Now, swayed by Hannibal's promises and fearing Roman retaliation if Carthage fell, he made a fateful decision. Officially aligning with Carthage meant bolstering Hannibal's resources, ships, supplies, manpower. It was a gamble that could shift the balance of power in Italy. Fabius Maximus hadn't waited for a full-scale battle. Instead, he launched a series of harassing raids against Carthaginian outposts in southern Italy, disrupting their supply lines, chipping away at their control. It was a slow, grinding campaign, but it was making a difference, weakening Hannibal's hold on the region. But will these small victories be enough to turn the tide? The answer remains shrouded in uncertainty. The Forum, the heart of Rome! But now smoke choked its ancient stones. A devastating fire ripped through the district, quickly spiraling out of control. The rumors flew like embers, whispers that Roman resistance fighters deliberately set the blaze to disrupt Hannibal's grip on the city. Was it a desperate act of defiance, or something more sinister, designed to sow chaos and fracture Carthaginian authority? The flames only served to deepen the distrust between occupiers and occupied. Hannibal tried to impose Carthaginian legal codes, his way of doing things. He believed it would bring order, but he was wrong. The Romans simply wouldn't accept it. Protests erupted in the streets. A quiet, pervasive resistance. People ignored the new laws, conducted business as usual, and refused to cooperate. It wasn't easy to govern a people who actively rejected your rule, even passively. Then came a spark that threatened to ignite a full-blown rebellion, say slave uprising. In one of Rome's poorest districts, desperate men and women seizing their chance at freedom. It was brutal, chaotic, and incredibly difficult for Hannibal to contain. How could he maintain order while simultaneously fighting a war? What would it take to quell this new threat before it spread like wildfire? Fabius Maximus, the man Hannibal underestimated. He wasn't a brilliant battlefield commander, but he was cunning. While Hannibal held Rome, Fabius launched raids on Carthaginian supply depots across the countryside. It hit Hannibal hard, disrupting his ability to feed his army and sustain his hold on the city. When your lifeline is cut, how long can you truly last? The cracks began to show. Hannibal's own second-in-command voiced doubts, openly questioning Hannibal's strategy of staying in Rome. He argued that Hannibal should focus on consolidating control over the Italian countryside, starving Rome into submission instead of holding a resistant city. Though was Hannibal clinging to a dream, a subtle challenge to his authority? Then came betrayal. Roman resistance fighters within Hannibal's headquarters stole crucial military plans, detailed maps, troop deployments, everything. Fabius Maximus now had vital intelligence for an upcoming offensive. How could Hannibal maintain secrecy when his inner circle was compromised? The stakes just got a whole lot higher. Hannibal was forced to make an impossible choice: to quell the slave rebellion and fight off Fabius Maximus's attacks. He had to pull troops from Rome itself, weakening his hold on the city. The situation spiraled further out of control, a constant drain on resources. Could Hannibal manage so many crises at once? His grip on power was slipping. The conflict spilled beyond Italy. Hero II, the king of Syracuse, clashed with Roman legions in Sicily, a significant escalation. Other powers were watching, waiting to see who would triumph. Was this the beginning of a much larger war? A ripple effect that could engulf the entire Mediterranean. Fabius Maximus seized his opportunity. With Hannibal's forces stretched thin, he launched a major offensive outside Rome, a desperate gamble to break the Carthaginian siege. The battle was fierce, brutal, and the outcome uncertain. Could Fabius finally deliver the blow that would shatter Hannibal's ambitions? Was this the beginning of the end?